All right, so we got some Canadian data today on oil flows. So as I updated those, I thought it'd be a decent video to do to just go through my process, not of updating the flows. That's pretty automatic. But once the flows are updated, to look at the pipes and analyze them to see if we see anything interesting. So yeah, let's dive in, and we can just go through these. There's not too many. You'll notice that we don't get full coverage of the Canadian pipes, as not all of them have to report to the Canadian federal government. So some of the pipes, like Express Canada, doesn't have to report flows to the Canadian government, so we'll have to wait for their FERC filing, which will happen within the next month, less than a month on that. But for the ones we have, I thought it'd be interesting to go through, just to show you my process when we get new data, to look at the lines to see if we see anything interesting. So just go down the list from kind of the most relevant ones to the least relevant ones. There certainly are some lesser relevant ones that we'll hit at the end here. But starting with this first one here, Trans Mountain, I think everyone's aware of this. Last year had their large expansion project come online. So we just got the last 3 months of data here. So these last three bars is what we're looking at here. And it looks like it had a pretty good August and September. Record flows down this main line here. As you can see, the capacity will move a little bit depending on operating conditions on the pipeline. So they do report their capacity as well on the line. But interesting to note that they did appear to have record volumes in August and September on that line. If we move further down the line, we can see the flows on this pipeline at a few different points. So flows coming into the Sumas point here that come into the U.S. This is mostly light oil, as you can see. These looks like they were down last quarter and have recovered. So this is going to be largely based on refinery pulls. So just turn on the refineries quick. There's several refineries here in Washington State that pull barrels down from Canada on this pipeline and use this. So we turn on Puget Sound. You can see that connection there. So when the refineries are down for maintenance or for one reason or another don't need the Canadian crude, which is pretty rare, you'll see dips like this. And it looks like that recovered this last quarter. So basically full output through this line, or very close to full output through this line in Q3 into the U.S. Other flows coming over here into the Burnaby area and then over to the export docks. We'll look at the export docks in a minute. But as you can see, pretty healthy flows here. Looks like they're down a little bit from last quarter. That's probably because there was refinery maintenance down in Washington, and those barrels, instead of going into the U.S., went over and got exported most likely. So you see this little dip down here. That's probably more barrels coming to the U.S. This quarter. Going a little further, we can see what actually hits the export docks here. As you can see, similar story to what we just looked at, down a little bit due to U.S. flows. Now, some people may ask, I've seen some stories written, why doesn't this line run full? It actually runs really close to full, and if you would have asked me a year and a half ago if it was running this full, I probably would have told you no, or at least I would have told you there's open capacity on other Canadian egress pipelines while this ran relatively full potentially. But there's been quite an increase since Trans Mountain expansion came online of production out of Canada. And maybe we'll do a part 2 on this probably, just talking about the next short to medium term, let's call it 2 to 5 years of Canadian production and what that means for the egress pipeline. Certainly there's been a lot of talk about further expansions with Enbridge coming out with their mainline optimization project. Their small express expansion going down into Southern Illinois Connector. Those are new egress projects that appear to be needed based on the preliminary research I've done on Canadian production over the next 5 years. So we'll get into that more in depth, but just a point here that this is a really healthy market from a production standpoint. We're dealing with an expansion project that came online and added just a lot of capacity here. And really the market has responded and filled most of the capacity on these Canadian egress lines already. So we'll hit on more of that later, but on to the next pipe. Let's do we'll do the Canadian Mainline, which is also Lakehead. We'll look at it from the U.S. standpoint of what's coming into the U.S. Nothing too exciting here. Steady Eddie. Looks like capacity was down a little bit in Q3 versus Q2. That's basically based on weird, different variable operating conditions on the pipeline, depending on which refineries may be in maintenance or need oil. Really, I think they said they were at apportionment for much of the quarter or all of the quarter. That looks to be pretty accurate based on how close the flows are to capacity. So you're looking at a pretty full pipe here. And as I mentioned earlier, we had the Trans Mountain project come online. That appears to be very close to full, has a little bit of space left on it, but this Enbridge's main line is still close to full. That wouldn't have been what I expected a year and a half ago, as I underestimated what Canadian production could do, and it continues to fill these pipelines pretty well. All right, on to the import pipelines, which are condensate pipelines. So let's take a look at those. We'll pull them both up since the story is kind of relevant for both. There's some interesting things with this. I cheated and looked ahead, so I've seen these flows already this afternoon. That's Southern Lights. Let's look at Cochin first. So Cochin is Pembina's pipeline. This is bringing condensate up into Canada. It gets mixed with the heavy barrels and then moved back down on the other pipelines, the Egress pipelines. You'll notice here this last month, so the month of September, we had flows down quite a bit. So I mean, you're always at risk of this being a data issue. It isn't completely unprecedented to see flows this low, and I do have some secondary sources. The Canadian government gives kind of a number for total imports of condensate that I can look at that does seem to back up the fact that there was a pretty significant decline in September. This could just be a seasonal issue. I know Pembina did mention, well, first of all, let's talk about, they did recontract this pipeline over a year ago, I believe. It was my understanding, but I didn't look this deep into it, that most of the capacity is under long-term contract. To the extent that that's not the case, they did say that they were impacted by tighter or narrower margins, condensate margins between Canada and the U.S., and did lose some variable barrels in Q3. That's what they said in the earnings call. This is quite a drop. This could just be a one-off. This could be shippers that just decided not to ship because the spread wasn't there, but they still paid the take-or-pay minimum volume commitments. So there may not have been a significant impact to Pembina, but this is worth watching. Again, this isn't unprecedented. This has happened back in time before, although this was COVID, so not great. It could be a data bust. Again, I think the data is probably accurate, and something to look at and keep an eye on. Now, why would this have happened? We could take a look at, I did take a peek at condensate production in Canada, and while that has gone up over the last year and a half, it's not enough to make me think that we just are having a significant drop off of imports of condensate from the U.S. You still need condensate. You still need more and more condensate as more and more heavy barrels get produced in Canada, and that's what's happening. So I don't think it's a supply issue up in Canada. Something to look out on, though. Southern Lights did expand recently. So in July, they finished their expansion, and although their barrels are down in September as well compared to like the July, but this is something to keep an eye on. If Southern Lights is able to expand, and they were able to expand, and push more volumes through this pipeline, it could potentially erode some of the spot volumes on Cochin. Again, it's 1 month of data. We'll need to look further at that. We'll need more data to see if that's actually happening, but it's something to keep an eye out on. All right, on to the next big one, Keystone. I think there's anything too exciting with this one. As you can see, flows are down, capacity's down. That's because of the milepost 171 incident, where they're operating at reduced operating pressure on that pipeline for now. I think the company said that will, the operating pressure they expect to be increased, ramped over 2020, the rest of 25 and 26 as regulators allow them to do that. So it's a full pipe. It's been a full pipe for a long time, mostly heavy coming down this pipe, a little bit of light. But you can definitely see the small impacts, and they're probably, I think they said they are able to serve all of their committed barrels. So that's what you're seeing here. Unfortunately for them, while those pressure restrictions are in place, it looks like they are not able to do very many variable barrels. So they're probably missing out on a little bit of money there, although the spreads are pretty narrow, so it's probably not that big of a deal right now. All right, some of the more obscure pipelines that we get data on from the Canadian federal government. This is West Spur pipeline. So this is taking production from kind of the Canadian Bakken area and moving it to the Enbridge Mainline. As you can see, the different types of crude. You saw this come off quite a bit during COVID because of COVID. And it's very slowly increased since COVID. So I'd say the production profile is pretty close to what we see in the Bakken. If we were to stack this up against Bakken production, it's pretty close. But pretty steady eddy here. This is a Kingston midstream pipeline. So interesting, but not that interesting as it stays pretty steady. Okay, now we're really going to get into the obscure ones for the 3 people still watching. This is Montreal pipeline. So this, and I'll bring on the sister pipeline here. I believe it's Portland. This is a Suncor pipeline that has the ability to take inbound imports from the U.S. that are coming on ship into the Portland terminal, and then move them to their Montreal refinery. So they have a refinery here. Suncor's refineries here. Suncor runs this line. As you can see, this is not heavily used, so probably just the pricing of the barrels that you're getting, probably close to a Brent pricing would be my guess, is what you're getting on the East Coast here. They are not competitive to what's coming up on the Enbridge Mainline. So we'll just bring up the Canadian Mainline, maybe. And then we can just click the rest of Enbridge. Line 9 to get up there. So that's where they're getting most of their barrels from. So, all right, last one. All right, Norman Wells pipeline. This is taking oil from way up here and moving that down. This is an Enbridge pipeline. As you can see, production has come off quite a bit here. Slow decline, medium to slow decline on this pipeline. Certainly possible that this may not be around too much longer if that production continues to come down. It's probably a pretty expensive pipeline to operate given the amount that's going through it, not very much, and then the length. So, but we do get volumes on this one as well. Yeah, so I thought this would be at least an interesting one to look at. So some things to point out just to review. The interesting things that stuck out to me is a lot of the pipelines a lot of the egress options are relatively full now. So again, surprising to me a year and a half later that we filled that with 500 to 600,000 barrels a day of new Canadian production. And there's appear to be more to come over the next 5 years. So these projects that are being announced by Enbridge, certainly rumors on others, they appear to be pretty good projects to me. And definitely think Enbridge probably has the leg up on the competition with their phased mainline optimization projects. They can probably phase those in and layer those in with production increases pretty well, and potentially keep competition out. So one more thing to note, obviously one of the big things we do with the platform is to show the flows and make those flows easier for you guys. We aren't stopping there. We're adding more stuff. So in the coming weeks, you'll see Platform 1.0 come out. This is the beta version that you've been seeing for the past 8, 9, 10 months or so. Version 1.0 will be out within the next few weeks, and we'll have some exciting new stuff to show you guys. So thanks for joining. I'll have Plainview Weekly up this weekend, so some interesting stuff in there. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and have a great week.